This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and given all the reviews and commentary I'd read before hearing this album, I was expecting it to be a straightforward nostalgia piece. And while memories of Liverpool, family, old friends and lost loved ones are everywhere on this record, what surprised me is that it never feels trapped in the past. The past is somewhere Paul likes to visit, but he's clearly got no intention of living there. That's because while memory is without doubt one of the album's central themes, Paul's determination to keep moving forwards may be an even bigger one. At 83, nobody would have blamed Paul for making an album that simply looked back. Instead, he's made a record that acknowledges the past while still sounding like the work of someone with new ideas to explore. Before hearing the album, I thought I knew exactly what the title meant. Liverpool, childhood, memories, and all of those things are certainly here. But what surprised me is that the album never really settles for simply looking backwards. Even so, memory remains one of the album's central themes. On so many tracks, Paul returns again and again to the people, places and experiences that shaped his life. It's also true that this may be the closest Paul has come in years to writing directly about his own life. While albums like Chaos and Creation in the Backyard often focused on his own thoughts and feelings, The Boys of Dungeon Lane seems more interested in the people and experiences that shaped him. And that's where many of the album's strongest moments are found.
Mama gets by, while Papa gets high.
The songs I found myself returning to most were Days We Left Behind, As You Lie There, Salesman's Saint and Mama Gets By. Not because they're nostalgic, but because they feel genuine. They feel like songs only Paul McCartney could have written. For me, The Boys of Dungeon Lane works best when Paul stops trying to prove something. Its most powerful songs aren't necessarily the most ambitious or experimental. They're the ones rooted in real people. A father, a mother, old friends, lost bandmates, even an unrequited love. The details may come from Paul's own life, but the emotions they express are universal. And perhaps that's why these songs connect so strongly. At times, it almost feels as though Paul has stopped worrying about whether a song is clever or contemporary and simply focused on telling the story. The result is some of the most honest songwriting he's produced in years. Before we continue, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Whether you're a collector, a musician, a writer, or running a small business, having a professional website has never been more important. And Squarespace makes it incredibly easy to create one. Their all-in-one platform gives you everything you need to build and manage a website, including beautifully designed templates, online stores, membership areas, email campaigns, and built-in analytics. Many of you have spent years building collections, researching family history, writing books, or developing specialist knowledge. A website is one of the best ways to share that work with the world, and Squarespace makes the process simple. To try it for yourself, go to squarespace.com for a 14-day free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/parlogram to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. My thanks to Squarespace for supporting the channel, and now back to the album. But if that were all there was to The Boys of Dungeon Lane, it might have become a rather heavy and predictable album. The reason it doesn't is that these songs sit alongside another side of Paul that has never really gone away. In a recent interview, Paul pointed out that only around half of the album is drawn from memories and experiences from his own life. The rest, as he put it, is other stuff. And he's right. Tracks like Never Know, Ripples in a Pond, Come Inside, and even the psychedelic Mountaintop remind us that Paul is still interested in following ideas wherever they lead. The production deserves some credit here too. Andrew Watt seems to understand what Paul is trying to do, and for the most part stays out of the way. The songs remain the focus, whether that's the emotion of Days We Left Behind, the storytelling of Salesman's Saint, or the warmth and humour of Home to Us. Listening again on vinyl, I found myself warming to some of the songs I was less sure about on first listen. One thing I did keep coming back to, though, was how much some of these songs seem to be crying out for a female voice. Never Know, in particular, feels like it would have benefited from the kind of vocal contrast that Linda often brought to Wings recordings. Home to Us demonstrates how effective that can be, and it's no coincidence that some of the album's warmest moments feature additional voices around Paul rather than Paul alone. That's not a criticism of the songs themselves. If anything, it's a reminder of how important those female harmonies were to the sound of so many classic McCartney records. The same is true of The Voice. By now, there's little point pretending Paul still sounds like he did in the 1970s. He doesn't. But what struck me, listening to these songs, was how rarely that mattered. In fact, on tracks like Days We Left Behind, Never Know and Salesman Saint, the older voice adds something. And perhaps that's what ultimately separates The Boys from Dungeon Lane from a purely nostalgic album. The memories are a big part of it, but they're balanced by someone who still seems genuinely interested in what comes next. At the time of recording, Discogs is already listing something like 17 different vinyl versions, including multiple colour variants and a picture disc. Whether that's becoming slightly absurd or simply part of the fun probably depends on how many copies you've already bought. Personally, I settled on the green vinyl edition, which came bundled with this t-shirt, and left it at that. So, where does The Boys of Dungeon Lane sit in Paul McCartney's solo catalogue? Well, that's not an easy question to answer, because this album doesn't feel quite like any of its predecessors. Many listeners have described it as the best since Chaos and Creation, not because the two albums sound particularly similar, but because they share some of the same qualities. The difference is that Chaos and Creation often felt like a man examining himself. The Boys of Dungeon Lane feels more like a man reflecting on the people and experiences that shaped his life. In that sense, this may be one of the most revealing albums Paul has ever made. Not because he tells us everything about himself, but because he tells us so much about the people who mattered to him. And perhaps that's why the album has resonated so strongly. Most listeners will never know what it was like to be a Beatle. But they do know what it's like to lose friends, remember childhood, think about their parents, and wonder where the years went. Those are things most of us can relate to. Even at 83, there's little sense here of a man retreating into the past. If anything, The Boys of Dungeon Lane feels like the work of someone who's finally become comfortable enough to look backwards without feeling the need to stay there. Some people have inevitably wondered whether this might be Paul's final album. But listening to it, I'm not sure that's really the point. Paul has recently spoken about the hundreds of musical fragments he keeps on his phone. But he also said that he doesn't feel any pressure to make another record, and that this one will do for a while. And I think that's part of what makes this album feel so confident. It doesn't sound like someone chasing the next project, but like somebody completely satisfied with the one he's just made. What I keep coming back to after several listens is just how comfortable Paul sounds on this album. For much of his solo career, he often seemed to have something to prove. But The Boys of Dungeon Lane doesn't sound like an album made by somebody chasing approval. It sounds like an album made by somebody who knows exactly who he is. It's not a perfect album, and I still don't think every experiment works. But after living with this album for several days and hearing it on vinyl, I find myself returning to the same conclusion. For me, this is Paul McCartney's strongest solo album since Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, and maybe one of his best ever. Not because it's nostalgic or that it's autobiographical, but because the songs are so good. Of course, do let me know your thoughts on the album in the comments. I promise I do read every single one. I'll be back next weekend to celebrate the 60th anniversary of one of the Beatles' most unusual albums. But that's all for this one, so I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.
Got a match, partner?
Don't reckon that's how I do, chum. Tune in again next week for more illuminating adventures. Yeah.